Good afternoon. My name is Ada Bobino, and I hope that you have been enjoying the wonderful offerings thus far from the festival, San Antonio Black International Film Festival, Animation in Black. We wanted to kind of pull things in a different direction. We've been talking about professions and you know, just pursuing animation on different levels, working in the industry. I want to start with for this panel to pull you into the educational side. So we dealing with training on that level, starting off post high school or getting going into your next phase of your life or direction that you want to go to with this field. So we have this panel is entitled Animation in Academia. And I'd like to bring on two professors from various different, very distinctive, different parts of the world, the country. How are you doing? I have good morning, good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you all doing?
Greetings,
Oh,
greetings. We're
doing well.
blessed.
Doing well.
Good.
How are you doing? Blessed. Give thanks.
Good.
Yeah.
So we have Dr. Charles daCosta from Queensland University of Technology in Australia, originally hailing from Ghana. So this brother's been taught here in the U.S., so he's been around the world with his professorship and teaching and working. And then here at the bottom, we have Tewodross Melchishua Williams.
Melchishua.
Right?
Just call me Teo. Melchishua. It's all good. I'm gonna help you out.
Yes. Who is presently at Bowie State University, Visual Communication and Digital Media Arts Department, which is under the Fine and Performing Arts Department, College of Arts and Sciences, and he is the chair and professor at that university, which is an HBCU in Prince George's County, Maryland. So I want to just get started, gentlemen. It's always important for me to start with your journey. Like, what interests you to even pursue animation on any level, starting off? Let's start with you, daCosta.
Right. Okay. So obviously, when people think of Africa, they don't think animation.
Right.
And that was the case when I was growing up in Ghana, because it just so happened that as a kid, I used to draw in sequence. I'm talking about from the age of about 6. I would always draw stories as opposed to just draw a picture. And so I had one teacher who really just tried to encourage me. What she did was she always had like loads of sheets of paper just to give me because I ran through them so fast. So she always, so I was always drawing. And at home, my mom would give me the dot to dot books, But I was generally interested in the sciences because I thought that the sciences often told us things that other people couldn't see. So I was interested in like how molecules moved and how that's moved, and I would personify them as a biology student. But I was still very much an art student. So I worked both ways, both the sciences and the arts. To me, there was no difference. And I think the reason I took that route was because my mom told me about Leonardo da Vinci. And she said, look, there was nothing like science or art to him because he just worked across the board. So I thought, well, I'm Leonardo da Vinci too. Since, that's just what I thought. I mean, I thought I could do what he could do. So I did everything without fear. But at some point, and I could be here forever, but I don't want to be because we shall meet in the flesh somehow. At some point, I got a job working at all places at the American Embassy School in Ghana.
This was as a teenager?
I was 19 years old.
Okay.
And I got a job working there but all the while through all my teens, I always kept drawing. All right. And I was into both the sciences and the arts student. I mean, I went to the school that Kofi Annan went to. So it was very much, you were pushed towards these kinds of things like law, architecture, all these kinds of things. That was, yeah. So that's what it was. But sixth, I got to do something called a national service,
Mm-hmm.
and for some reason, I ended up doing my national service in the American Embassy, in the American Embassy School.
Huh.
So I was a teaching assistant or like a teacher aide for grades 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized something that was going on was, as a kid, I didn't solve math problems the way everyone did. I saw pictures and I drew them and I solved the problems and the teachers couldn't get it. But then when we had to go from primary school, that's what we called it. We have primary, secondary, and then we have university. When we had to go to primary school, from primary school to secondary school, and we were taking the exams, the teachers were really concerned about me because when it came to math, they couldn't figure me out. All the other subjects were fine, and I didn't do things the way they did. So when
But
I
you got
took,
them right. You got them right though. The problems.
I'll solve the problem. But when
Oh,
I
okay.
explained, they couldn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
So I took the exam, and I was the first to finish. Exam was a 3-hour exam. I finished in about 45 minutes and walked out. And they were like, "Oh, this guy's failed. It's trouble." But when the results came out, I topped the school. So when I went to do my national service in the American Embassy School, I saw these kids who had a similar thing. They couldn't solve problems the way people thought, but they could if you gave them the freedom to express themselves in images. So I got them drawing their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what then started to happen was these kids will solve their problems, and the teachers, my overseers, in a sense, my supervisor, thought I was a brilliant teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted me to teach there. But I said, no, I wasn't ready to teach there.
Mm-hmm.
I'll need some certifications. I couldn't get any certifications in what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied to go to the university to do architecture, and I got accepted to do it. But when I got there and it was time for me to ask questions, I asked them questions like, here we are in a third world country. We're receiving loads of money from the IMF and all these places, right? They said, yeah. I said, so you think the IMF is going to have us be the lead architects on our project?
Mm-hmm.
They said, it will be a bit difficult. I said, well, and I have no future here. And this is a guy who's coming to university who was telling the interview panel that he had no future in a place like this because there was no way out.
Yeah.
So obviously, they said a happy goodbye. I mean, they didn't say it then, but they didn't bother with me again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discovered that there was a film school in Ghana at the time, which had been set up by the Germans to train technicians in Ghana. The idea was that because of all these visa issues and all stuff like that, they'll train people now in Africa as opposed to in Germany. So they set up this school. It's called the National Film and Television School. So in my research, I found the school existed. But usually, no people went there from high school. Because it wasn't seen as a prestigious school or a good school or anything. It was for those who had no hope, who'd been working in state organizations and just needed, to kind of show that that at least they had some kind of tertiary experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I opted to go there because I found there was an animation course that no one was doing. So I got in there and I was the only student.
Wow.
And so once I got in there and I started to do the animation, I mean, I went with a portfolio, which most people didn't do because I had like tons of drawings. And once I got there and I started to do the animation, I said to myself, you know what? The interesting thing is this school is a member of an organization called SELECT, which is the world body of film schools.
Mm-hmm.
So it has a standing that nobody else knows. They don't know what power they've got. People just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I said I was going to challenge myself by doing work that when university students from like UCLA, the National Film and Television School in England, the Australian Film, Television, Radio School, all these top film schools, that if any of them ever saw my work, they wouldn't see any difference. You see what I'm saying? I challenged myself by looking at the kind of work that was coming from those kinds of places.
Right.
And by looking at the kind of work that appeared on television in those countries, and not just the Warner Brothers and stuff like that. I was looking for quirky things that, you know, captured people's attention. So that's where I came from. So I challenged myself. I did all that stuff. But I was very much a film school. As a film school, so I was very much a film student. I learned cinematography. I did sound design, film editing.
Wow.
I took all those electives, did everything. I also majored in graphics as well. So as part of the challenge, what I did was I ensured that every director in the school, I worked on their production, either as an auxiliary cameraman or as the graphics person. So I was in everybody's production. So at the end of my year, when film directors had to have at least 2 short films each, my name appeared in everyone's film. Then I had to make mine. And it was, for me, by watching or looking out for what was happening internationally, I was learning really early that it was important to get your name out there, you know, like portfolio. And this was, you know, like 88, 89. So that was what happened. And then I would later get a scholarship to go. I started to work on commercials because there wasn't much animation around Ghana. I started to work on commercials while working at the Dubois Memorial Center for Pan-African Culture. After my degree, I decided not to work in the film school because they wanted me there as a teaching assistant. But I opted to work at the Dubois Memorial Center for Pan-African Culture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I went there and became the audio visual production officer. And they didn't have anything like that. But when I got there,
I didn't know they had that because I've been to the center. I didn't know they had that.
That's because I left. Because I went there and proposed the idea and said, look, we can record all your lectures and we can record cultural events around the country and create a repository here so that when all the brothers and sisters from the diaspora who were streaming in came, they could get something to take back. And so I sold that idea to them because I grew up very much on the diaspora thing. My name's daCosta. My father was Brazilian who grew up in Ghana. My mom's Ghanaian.
I was wondering about that last name.
Yeah, me chamo Carlos Enriquez Cristiano daCosta. Anyway, that's by the way. So I was interested in the diaspora. Everything that happened has been going on, you know, and my interest has not stopped. And so by working in Dubois Memorial Center, I kind of got the opportunity to again reread African history again from the point of view of the Middle Passage, but more to connect the dots because, look, the problem you have in Savannah, Georgia, where a lot of the Blacks there are detached from the understanding or overstanding of other Blackness is similar to what happens in Ghana, where Ghana, you know, people were actually disconnected from what's going on in the Middle Passage. They couldn't hear about Cape Coast. How many people did you see in Cape Coast when you went there? It was only tourists. But, you know, so it was Dubois Memorial Center helped me to do that even a whole lot more. You understand? And while I was there, I knew opportunities were few. So I started to work on commercials, you know, just commercials for anybody, like storyboarding for somebody who's going to do something on a Weetabix or some kind of cereal thing or whatever. But I also then started to film and photograph funerals because they were there, and naming ceremonies and all these things. I'll just go around and do it. And so as I was doing that, somebody saw me. It was actually the managing director or the CEO actually of Mitsubishi, saw me photographing a Mitsubishi billboard. I didn't know who he was, but he thought it was interesting and peculiar to see somebody photographing billboards. So he stopped to speak to me. And I said, yeah, I like billboards because it takes a lot to design them, but nobody really has you know, kind of a repository of such images, which you can use as reference or to talk about. Then he gave me his card, and he was a Mitsubishi boss, and that was a Mitsubishi billboard. And so from then, he called me to start helping the marketing department structure their ideas. I was only a year out of film school
Hmm.
until it got to a point where the Japanese fellow who was in charge of Mitsubishi in West Africa, well, most of Africa actually, and Middle
Mhm.
East,
Mhm.
came down one day. He saw the commercial it produced, because it was in his interest to make sure things were. He saw the stuff and he asked them, which agency did this work? And they said, oh, it's not an agency, it's a guy who did it here. So he asked to meet the person, and he got to meet me. And he asked me, did you do this? I say, yeah, how did you get to do this? I said, well, I'll go to the Japanese embassy, I'll go to the libraries and find information. And that's so he just looked at me and he said, what do you want Mitsubishi to do for you? So the moment he asked that question, I said to him, I want to go to the top art college in the United Kingdom. It's called Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design. It was like I was ready for him. I said, it's called
Mhm.
Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design. They produce all the top designers in the world, not just because they've got the best teachers, but it's because they have a good network. And I think if I go there, it would help me elevate animation and the arts that we have here, because we got up until now, there's no connection. He
Mhm.
looked at me and he shook his head and he said, we'll get back to you. Long and short of it is, within less than a month, they came back and said, we're going to fund you to go to St. Martin's.
Mhm.
But again, what's interesting is as I began to advance in animation, what I would find is anytime I go back to Ghana to try to help or to try to contribute, people will still see animation as, oh, that's kid stuff. Oh, yeah, that's that. That's that.
Mhm.
So it's something I've had to grapple with. Now it's slowly
Mhm.
they're getting to know it, but I've traveled further.
Mhm.
So that's the abridged version of my Odyssey.
Well, that's a very interesting abridged version. It is. We're gonna get further into that because a lot of African from different part of Africa that I had talked to, they were discouraged by their parents for pursuing art and all that. So we're going to talk about that. But let me go ahead and see Tewodross
Yes.
Williams. What swayed you to kind of move toward the direction of animation or have an interest in animation?
Well,
Because ever since I've been knowing you, you've been like Mr. Animated animation.
yes, and just listen to my brother's story. I mean, I'm loving this diaspora connection, man, because this is really where he left off was where I want to make this full circle, man. And in terms of our people in animation and telling our stories, so I actually started off at, drawing at the age of 5. Very interested in the arts, doing sculpture, puppet shows. I thought I wanted to be a special effects artist at very young. So and I, grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, and PG County for the most part, and was taking art classes and really started getting into stop motion animation, especially, and that was sort of my entry point into animation. Ended up going to Morgan State University, HBCU, and they didn't have an animation program there. But I decided I'd sort of kind of do the best I could and build my own program. And so I started work doing just my own animation between Morgan and also there was in DC at the time there was a place called the Capitol Children's Museum
Mm-hmm.
where there was an animation center, and so I ended up kind of connecting with them, and next thing teaching stop motion animation to children there in the DC area. And that's where I actually really found this love. But I think it goes back to when I really in the beginning started drawing and painting. I really looked at my pictures and like, what would happen if these would move? I wanted to see my stuff move. And so this interest in film and cinema and animation and visual effects really started to spark. So again, at the Children's Museum, that really allowed me to work on one of my first stop motion films that I did with some folks there that won a couple of awards called Spare Change,
Mm-hmm.
and that really sparked it. So and I've just always really wanted to pursue that. Even at Morgan, even though we didn't have that as a major, it's there now. Of course, it's there years after we graduate. They have a
Oh,
wonderful
wow.
screenwriting and animation program, Brother Keith
Hmm.
Mellinger runs. So yeah, I've just been very interested in animation and storytelling. And then just to kind of fast forward a bit, I ended up teaching in high school system here in Prince George's County for a while, teaching art, computer graphics, and
Hmm.
incorporating animation into those classes. Left the school system, went to Prince George's Community College. Then I ended up at Howard University teaching and teaching animation as well. And so, yeah, and I've always had this passion for seeing, and obviously the love that I have for HBCUs and seeing a strong animation program,
Yeah.
with Black students and students of the African diaspora at these HBCUs. So left Howard, I'm sorry, and ended up over at Bowie State, where I've been for past 19 years.
Has it been 19
It's been
years?
19 years, yes.
Woo! Wow.
And yeah, and so I'm a professor over there teaching animation, cinematography, because film is still a good passion of mine. We also do hip hop studies as well. And so, yeah, so my journey was really, yeah, just as a child wanting to see things move and wanted to tell stories, not seeing stories that reflected my people, just like my brother said, in terms of Black stories or stories of African people. And then and I have to throw in again the importance of the HBCU experience in there, because because I didn't have what I wanted to get, I decided I wanted to build that here at Bowie State,
Mm.
and be able to create an avenue for young students alike, who want to pursue animation and filmmaking and other related areas.
Mhm.
And then I think what's important to throw in there between is I was blessed to uh, take some trips to Africa, and in the Caribbean, and my father was a teacher, and so I've always been exposed to international cultures, and starting to connect more with my brothers and sisters in the continent and the Caribbean. I'm going to say it was really the influences, probably Malcolm X and Bob Marley. Just
Mm.
those two influences started me thinking. It wasn't for Bob Marley, I wouldn't even thought about Africa and the diaspora. I mean,
Mhm.
and then, of course, with Malcolm X's teaching and the teachings of Marcus Garvey, I started thinking like, yeah, I am an African in America, right? Like, and so,
Mhm.
I've had some, so I live between Baltimore and DC, and just the foundations there with the African Center community in Baltimore and the Rasta community in DC and Baltimore. So
Mhm.
that really laid my foundation for where we are right now, here at Bowie State. And so I'm really excited to hear my brother's story, because there's so many parallels in terms of the connection with Ghana. I've not been to Ghana, but it is on my list, my brother. But so yeah, just really wanting to see and empower our young people, to create stories that look like us, that reflect us, that tell our wonderful history. We got some dope stories that have yet to be told. And
Mhm.
I'm just so happy to be on this panel.
Mhm. Thank you so much. I mean, you said a lot there that I wanted to pick into, but
Sure.
then within my senior brain, just I gotta write things down. But I think two of the things that pop out when you both of you talk, and me even doing this panel, Animation in Black, I mean this festival, was to connect the continent, the Caribbean, the states with each other, because everybody is doing similar things, but it's on different levels. Like people always think just industry or Hollywood when they think animation, but people are having opening their own studios, having their own websites and channels, social YouTube channels or whatever, and actually doing very well. So, but one of the things I wanted to bring up, you two seem to one both be prodigies in terms of having this drawing skill at very very young ages. But it seemed like you were also encouraged, had parents or
Yes.
parent that encouraged you. Because I got from a lot of people I talked to, especially Africans that I talked to on different panels, especially their parents were like, you got to be a doctor or a lawyer, and that was the way that they would go. Animation was not supported, arts were not supported in their world, in their family, in their houses, so they kind of got into it in other ways. But that is typically the mentality of a lot of African parents. I don't know about US, but I know a lot of African parents that you have to be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, in terms of pursuing your education. You can't be anything other because nothing else is successful. I mean, what is your feedback, especially Charles
Yeah.
coming from the continent?
It's a very interesting one. I
Yeah.
think, in a sense, when it comes to Africa, I'm a walking paradox. I say walking paradox because remember I told you I was both into the arts and the sciences. All right, and yes, I realized that there were a lot, in lots of ways, people had to be either a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And you see, what used to happen is when I was very little, we used to always have to write essays. Actually, we had to write these essays from when we were about 6 years old, because I went to boarding school.
6.
Uh,
Wow.
yes, yes, yes. I went to boarding school. Actually, I went when I was 5 plus. So because I was reading and writing by the time I was 4. So they got me to go, and I had an auntie who was a teacher. My mom was also a teacher,
Okay.
but my mom taught in a teacher training college. So she trained educators. And then I had an auntie who was a teacher. So what they would do, she was in primary school. So they'll have me go with her to school. I never went to kindergarten. I never did. So I would go with her to school, to her primary school. And as she taught grade 1, I'll be sitting next to her and taking it all in. That was my experience. So I started going to school to take the school experience in.
Yeah.
So by the time I was 5 plus, it was like, no, you can't do this any longer. You just have to go to school. And so I got taken to a school, and it was a boarding school. So basically you went in, you were there for 12 weeks, and then you came home.
I can't imagine. I can't
Yeah, yeah.
imagine leaving my 5-year-old.
I did that. I just went and I got in.
Wow.
And and I was in the boarding school system till I was 17. So 12 years. But what was good about the boarding school system, right? Is look, Africa till today is very ethnocentric. People are very much into their, oh, I'm an Ashanti, I'm a Fanti, it's like that. So when you start talking to people, very quickly they will ask you, oh, where do you come from? And you say, oh, do you speak Fanti, or do you speak Tree or Kwapim or Brong or whatever? You get it quickly breaks down to that. But what the boarding school system did is it made us become brothers and sisters. So
Despite your ethnic
yes. So having grown up with all these people, like people were your brothers first, or you just talk to them, you just melded with them until today. So we kind of disrupted that kind of system. See, the boarding school system actually had been created for the elite who had, like, they had their kids who were like, those who were like diplomats. It started with the whites bringing their kids and keeping them in these places where they looked after them. But after independence, Kwame Nkrumah, the first president, what he did was he turned those schools, rather than just shut them down, he decided to turn them into places where government workers and others who were going to be going overseas and stuff like that, and didn't want their children to get cultural shock and all those things, put them in. So they came there. And also his vision was that these kids will grow up together and not talk about ethnicity. So in a sense, that's what happened. So that was quite good for us. That was quite good for us in a sense. It had its negatives, but that was it. But while I was in that school, I had a particular teacher again who, anytime he saw me drawing, he would knock me on the head. Get serious. daCosta, always drawing, get serious. So he was the one. So when I saw him coming, I would hide the drawings and do the work. You understand? So I learned to negotiate that. But my dad, he never told me to, not draw. Anytime he saw my drawing, he was like, oh, that's really nice. You've done a good job. And that was it. He was a lawyer. He was also at one point a minister in the government at one point. But he would say, okay, that's good. And then he'll just go on with his work because I wasn't disturbing him. My mom was also found it interesting that I was drawing. She also encouraged me to read a lot so that I could, produce more stories. So as an educator, she didn't, she just saw I was drawing and I was doing things with it. And then during my teen years, what happened was that not having the opportunities to produce just drawings as I wanted, I started to make posters, of people like Marcus Garvey, of Che Guevara,
Mhm.
um, Peter Tosh, Bob Marley. I just made posters and I hand drew these posters, and they look like paintings. They look like actually they were actually printed, but they were handmade. And I'll send them to the University of Ghana bookshop to get them sold. So I was making my pocket money through those drawings.
Hmm.
So they saw the drawings. I mean, my mom saw it as a good thing because
Of
I was
course.
also a science student. Because all around me were science students. I was doing that. So nobody really told me not to. But I had a nasty experience once. I had a girlfriend, and she was a pharmacist. She was majoring, in pharmacy, and her dad met me, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Animation." He said, "What is it?" He was an engineer, and he basically looked at, he said, "So what were you doing with your life?" So I said, "Animation." He said, "What do you mean?" And I explained to him in detail how lubrication worked and how pistons worked. And he said, "Yeah, that's right. Oh, you've been reading?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, the thing is, if you want to teach that kind of stuff," and this is a professor, I'm talking a full professor of engineering. I'm telling him, if you want to teach that stuff, you can't use cameras and films and you can't use actual things to demonstrate. You got to do it diagrammatically.
Mhm.
I said, yes, diagrammatically helps. I said, that's why all the physics books and all the chemistry books and everything, they use diagrams. I said, but if those diagrams start to move, people will be more interested in.
Right. Mhm.
And then he looked at me and he said, yes. And what else? And I asked him a question. I said, no, Kekule. He said, yes, that's in chemistry. Kekule is a guy who discovered molecular structure, as it was. I said, well, Kekule actually fell asleep one afternoon and he had a dream, and he woke up and he drew the dream. And that's how we got to know how molecules and stuff work, how they move around each other. And so he was using his powers of visualization to help education. I said, that's the kind of thing I want to do. And he looked at me and said, you're not serious. So it was like I'd explained all these things, but there was a missing thing that didn't connect. You
Mhm.
understand? So that was the only time when I had that kind of thing growing up. But I knew that around me, people whispered that I was a freak.
Mhm.
I was happy with
Wow.
it.
Because
Yeah.
you're just different at doing something. But
Yeah, I did those things. Yeah.
Tedra, you too. I
Yeah.
mean, you seem to have had parents too that were encouraging,
Yeah.
professors, teachers.
Yeah, so my father was a foreign language teacher, and so
Oh wow.
so I always swore I would never be a teacher. Look where I am right now, right? But I love it. I love it so much. So
What
yeah,
language do you teach? I'm just curious.
French, Spanish, German. He taught journalism
So are
in high
you
school
are you
system.
bilingual? Trilingual?
I speak a little French, just a little
Okay.
un peu. That when I said I had a chance to go to Africa, I ended up going to Morocco and Senegal, so I really had to use it then. But yes, my father was very supportive. He always would say that my father also went to Morgan State, another Morgan grad, that he wanted to pursue art. But again, oh, you can't really make money off that, so he ended up going into teaching. And so yeah, we have that here in the U.S. too. In terms of that's not go get a real job. The starving artists.
Hmm.
Kind of idea. So yeah, the parents were definitely very supportive. But I think what's interesting, and just even listen to my brother here, is as I'm teaching animation now, is seeing how much science and technology is involved with this now. We had a conference last week with my dean, and we're talking about STEAM or STEM, and I'm like, hey, I mean, in animation, you got physics, you've got frames, you got geometry, you got math, and so there's so much science,
But they
in
need to keep
animation,
the
right?
they need to keep the art and science. They need to teach more STEAM.
Yeah, I say
Steam.
put
I mean,
that. Yeah, right.
yes.
It all connect. The science, the artist, the
Yeah.
designers, the engineer. We got to work together. The
Yeah.
musician, the dancer, the writer. Right. So, and that's sort of very similar to kind of like listen to my brother's story in terms of um, you know. I did have that support, but yeah, still, even here in the U.S., it's animation. It's it's usually a pretty predominantly white dominated world, and so there are not a lot of people of color in this industry. And so I've always been set to challenge that and to say, well, maybe we don't need Hollywood. Maybe we could do our own thing. Maybe we could have our own studios. And so I was also blessed to have a wonderful mentor by the name of Theodore Collins, who was one of the few Black animators that had an animation studio in the 1940s. He's transitioned now. But my point is I've been reaching out to a lot of animators who have been around, for a long time. Some of the first animators at Disney, Black animators, Ayoka Chinziro, one of my wonderful mentors, the first wonderful first African American woman animator, Ayoka Chinziro, who's down in Spelman College. And so, but yeah, just really trying to make sure that we tell these stories. We say, yes, you can survive as an animator, as an artist. It is a hustle. It is hard, no doubt, but it can be done. And I'm so happy about what I'm seeing right now. Compared to 10, 20 years ago, I just got off a call with brothers in Lagos. It's some dope stuff coming out of Africa
Nigeria.
and the Caribbean. My sister Camille Savon down in Trinidad with her
Mhm.
studio in animation. So right now, it's like the Pan-African animation renaissance is happening. I've never seen so much wonderful work coming out of all over the continent, all over the world, literally, from our people of African descent across this planet. So it's amazing right now.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. We don't see it. We don't
Right.
see animation. You're talking about on the. I got to look up Theodore Collins, by the way.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
I'm just looking on YouTube because of the. Thank God the internet connects us in terms of world.
Hmm.
And just seeing the things like on the festival alone, we're speaking to people from studios from Cameroon. We're speaking to from Uganda. I mean, people are from the Caribbean. People are doing great stuff, and
Amazing.
we don't have the mass, um, I guess, machine of the industry in terms of getting it out there for us to see. That's why, festivals like this and different
Yeah.
animation, Afro animation, and summits like
Yep.
that are so important, so you can see what people are doing. So,
And I would add the industry's taking notice. The industry is now coming back. Reaching to even animators, Royo Coupe, who just is doing something with Disney now. So now they're knocking on Africa's door. Where they were for many years ignoring. And I think yes, technology and has a lot to do with it, and the access to just having access to the tools to create your own film. You can do your animation, and so yes, it's really exciting. And my goal is just to continue to try to empower our students, make these global Pan-African connections with HBCUs, which I think is critically important. Yeah.
So what are some things going on? Let's kind of move into the
Yes.
academia. What are some things going on at Bowie State? Because you mentioned the hip hop, and that's like unheard
Yes.
of
Yes.
at a
Yes. Yes.
university.
We
So
got to
that's
talk about
very
music.
revolutionary. Very
Yes.
revolutionary move.
So in addition to animation, see, and let me just say this: this all with animation. I know I don't jump to animation, hip hop, but this all started at Morgan State. So the HBCU experience is like so critically important. And so hip hop, we have a hip hop studies and visual culture minor. We're the only one of the only HBCUs with a minor in hip hop. I've been teaching hip hop courses for about 15 years now. And so, yes, I'm actually excited right now that we are offering some courses, not only hip hop studies and the study of like ethnomusicology, but it's really interdisciplinary. We plug it into, African history, African American history, business, marketing. There's a brother over in biology who's talking about hip hop and biology. I didn't know there was such a thing. And so I'm very excited this year to be teaching with one of the first MCs, woman MCs in hip hop. Her name is MC Sharrock. She was with a group called the Funky Four Plus One More, one of the first hip hop groups to be on Saturday Night Live. You want to Google that. So yeah, we're really excited this semester to kind of not just hip hop. I mean, hip hop gets them in the door, but we're getting into Afrofuturism in my class. We're getting into fashion. We're getting into film and media and animation, of course. And so yeah, we're very very excited to be able to offer this minor.
Wow, what did you have to do to sell hip hop as a discipline of
It was
study?
it,
'Cause
it, it was
there
it,
was
it,
some
it was
eyebrows
rough. Yeah,
raised.
yeah. I definitely got some looks. I had a couple colleagues that thought it was crazy. Like, what are you hip hop? What are you talking about? And you want to do hip? I mean, it really was a conversation that I was having in the lab with students. We're sitting around talking music and hip hop. And I said to two students, were like, "Hey, professor, this should be a class." I'm like, "Let's do it." So now we actually have took the one class, and now we've added 4 or 5 more. and created this
Wow.
minor. There was actually a conference. We just had a conference of hip hop educators across the nation. There's another brother starting one down in Virginia. Virginia State and a few other HBCUs that are teaching hip hop studies. And so, yeah, that's even starting to happen. And to me, it's a reflection of, our culture. You couldn't study African studies at most HBCUs for a long time. You couldn't study jazz at Howard University or Morgan for many years. So now we're starting to see it's okay to study ourselves, our own people, our own culture, and really and do some really deep research in it.
Mm-hmm. So that's awesome. So, what are some things going on in Australia? Because that's not even in a lot of people's frame of reference in terms of, well, I don't know. I'm saying a lot of people. I'm thinking from a U.S. perspective, because I got to bash that. But what are some things going on in terms of initiatives, in terms of recruiting Black folks, in terms of what do you all teach there?
So, okay.
Mhm.
In terms of
How do
initiatives,
you get to Australia anyway? But anyway, that's a story
I put it
itself.
all, I put it all in one. So, in terms of initiatives to recruit Black people, I don't see any.
Mm,
I don't see any.
mhm,
So that's being 100% honest. I don't see any.
mhm,
How did I get here? It's something that still surprises a lot of people on the street when they see me. What do you do here? What do you teach? Animation, because they still don't connect that it has anything to do with people like me. But it happened in two ways. One was as a kid, I had a huge world map on my wall, and I would always stare at him. I mean, by the time I was 10 years old, I knew the capitals of every country in the world. I knew their GDP, I knew their presidents, I knew just everything. You have to just mention a nation and I'll tell you about it. There was no Wikipedia then, it was just that. And so one day, my mom just said, take that big map down. It was huge. I said, why should I take it down? She said, take it down. And then she said, put it on the floor. And I said, Mommy, that's messing my thing up. She said, listen, put it on the floor. So I said, okay, I did. Everything was twice. And she said, walk all over the map. I said, why should I? I'm going to mess it up. She said, walk all over the map. So I walked all over it. She said, take it and put it back. She said, you're going to go everywhere in the world.
mm,
You spent all your time staring at that. You're going to walk all over the world. So
mhm,
somewhere along the line in my head, it was like, I'm supposed to be going everywhere in the world,
mhm,
right? So that's the first thing. I always say that it's good to have a dream, but a dream happens in a dormant state. You can daydream and you can dream while you're asleep. It's always in a dormant state. But if you have a vision, it's proactive. So unless your dream becomes a vision, you can't create a mission and you can't then uh, put in place the set of actions that would bring you back to realize your dream.
mhm,
It's a process. So for me, what happened was that I always did workshops wherever I went. I started when I was in Ghana, training as an animation student, right? I would go to high schools, secondary schools, and show them animation films and talk to them about it. I didn't know what was going to happen then. I just did it. I just felt I had to do it.
mhm,
So that's kind of how I began. Later, as I worked in animation in different parts of the world, like England, and then it was Germany, and everywhere, I would always go back and talk to people about it. So before long, like I remember when I was training at Zenderfries Berlin, one of the things that happened was I got appointed as the leader of the team for the training team. I got appointed as a leader of that team. It was an international team. And so I got exposed to their different countries, and it was good to know. So I had people in different places suddenly, you understand. And now later, my aim would be to visit everybody in their country because they were all my friends,
mhm,
you know. So that's how it kind of began. But coming into Australia, I used to teach in Savannah College of Art and Design. And I was instrumental in developing the history of animation and program, and also helping to make sure that they produced more successful MFAs. Because what happened was there was also an MA program, and often students who come to do the MFAs, but because of money or so, they'll end up just cutting it short to do an MA to go, or loads of them will quit the course without ever doing their masters. So it was this thing going. So I was supposed to be a bridge builder. Now, how did I do that? It was because I also, somewhere along the line, I actually majored or took a postgraduate certification, postgraduate diploma of education that specialized in research methodology. So I was able to always build a connection between the theory and the practice. For me, this was important because, I'd kind of grown up with so many Pan-Africanists, with historians, with storytellers and stuff like that. And they always had a reason for their story. But translating that into practice was not something they did. So I saw myself as the person who would do that, who would address those gaps. So I started encouraging students to actively document what they were doing, and then be able to take a step back and look at what they were doing through the lens of what they've documented.
Mm-hmm.
That way, when you talked about things like pedagogy and you talked about, okay, take a pedagogical approach, teach yourself how to teach properly, or learn to ask these critical questions, because now you can see yourself or you can see your work, those kinds of things, so those allowed me to be able to communicate with students in ways that allowed them to write thesis that actually supported their creative work, their creative outcomes. And so I would go to conferences and talk about that in animation, like Society for Animation Studies. I was there talking about, I've been there for years. I'll be talking about how we teach animation, oral history and oral traditions in animation. And oral history was also particularly interesting because there was a guy called Hugh Trevor Roper, and he was a Regius Professor of History, which means the King's appointed Professor of History in England or in the UK. And he said in 1964 in some broadcast, some BBC broadcast that he made, and he said that Africa has no history. He said what Africa has, he said Africa had no history before the arrival of the colonialist. He said
Colonization. Wow.
before, he said what Africa had was darkness, and darkness is not a subject of history. You see, so he discounted everything that we had done for thousands of years. And because he was a Regius Professor of History, his word was taken. I heard some of those lectures through, like, I read books and I read about them and I heard them. And in my lifetime, in 1983, as a teenager, I was so glad when he fell from his place of grace. And how did he fall? Because he supported something called the Hitler Diaries that were published in Germany. There were these forged documents that were called the Hitler Diaries, and he came out to defend them as authentic. And when they were exposed, he lost his job and he fell from grace. And so from then it became easier for others to deconstruct his work. But for me, those histories were important, but they had to be translated into interesting work. And animation, the art of impossible worlds, allows us to do that. So I would tell people or teach people to look at just whatever history or whatever little story they thought they had, and think of how they could translate it so it could impact someone's life, and then write about that experience. So, and it didn't matter whether they were green, they were blue, they were cheese, or they were chalk. Anybody could do that. So the kind of work I was doing then and talking about in conferences and stuff attracted some attention in Australia, in a place called the University of Technology, Sydney. And so they have the Sydney International Animation Festival. And I got invited there at one point to come and speak about how blacks are, are portrayed, the histories of blacks and stuff like that, because there's all the histories that are emerging here, So they thought I should come. So I came there, and it was a very interesting, very, very interesting and enlightening experience. But on my return to Savannah, I started to get invitations from Australia, and one of them was a university called Swinburne University of Technology, and they invited me over, asked me to come over to come and set up an animation degree. So that's what moved me to Australia in December 2011 from Savannah. Yeah, so I came to set up that degree,
Well, that's
and
a
then
different world, different world, different
yeah,
world.
and after a while, after working there for nearly 5 years, I left the university and I did some private work with the biggest emergency service provider here in Australia called St. John's Ambulance. I worked with them developing an interactive game that taught children, uh, the doctors, what they call doctors ABC. So that's stuff like all the emergency first steps that you took. Yeah, so I did a project, an interactive game with them, and it kind of won awards. And while that game was just getting up, this university called me to come here to kind of work to help develop
Pulled you in. They pulled you
research
in.
parts. Yeah, yeah. So kind of that's part of my trip.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just like, so they really, I mean, that's a different world. I mean, we need to get you to an HBCU, huh, Tewodross?
Yeah. I'm like, come on over here, man.
We need to get that talent into an HBCU.
Yes.
The
You're
training.
You're hired, brother. You're hired.
Anytime, man. Let's speak. Yeah, let's talk.
Oh
We're
man, we got you, man.
Ada's got all my details, so I can pass them on to you as well.
Absolutely. Right,
But
right.
no, I want to get into, because there is not a move. I mean, we're talking academia, but
Mhm.
our counterparts, I mean, this industry is largely white males.
Yeah.
And a lot of them get in through the door without a college education. They get in through knowing
Right.
somebody and just kind of learning and going that route.
Right.
So going the academia route a lot of times is essential for us to getting in, because you can get internships, you're getting exposure
Right.
from connecting with other like-minded students, kind of building your team, and there's just so much in terms of that going to an educational institution would teach you prior to getting an animation, but it's just getting into the door. So what types of animation and animation related fields can students get into through this profession? I know, because you mentioned stop animation, rather computer graphics,
Stop motion.
2D,
Right.
3D, claymation. I mean, what is the
Yeah.
range of
Yeah, so
teaching?
so in the program that I teach in is called VCDMA, and we teach 2D animation, 3D animation, motion graphics actually, and stop motion is actually, ironically, that's our new class is stop motion, and that's through a partnership that we have with Leica Animation Studios. And so Leica reached out to us a couple of years ago, said, hey, we want to partner with Bowie State, and we wanted to develop this a curriculum in stop motion, and actually built we actually just built the first stop motion animation studio at the HBCU at Bowie State. So we teach
Wow.
all of those. And so just to kind of answer your question, in addition to animation, we also teach design, graphics. We also teach digital media. We teach film. We teach fashion and costume design. And so as
So
far as, yeah,
concept. I'm gonna jump in and
sure.
then I'll shut up. So I talked to the first Black concept studio.
Yeah.
So even that whole thing about a concept studio.
Yeah, I mean, character development, concept artists, conceptual artists, storyboard artists, animatics, motion graphic designers. I mean, we teach motion graphics because everyone may not be interested in character animation. And so a lot of our designers are like, hey, I want to get into that. Now we're slowly getting into game design and immersive media now. We just developed a new major, actually partnered with computer science and game design and XR, and getting into virtual production now, and this whole metaverse thing, which I'm still trying to figure out. So I would say, there are a number of different careers and partnerships that we have now It's interesting. It's like we've been around we're a relatively new program. We started in 2011, but now everyone has been reaching out to Bowie. Like Pixar's coming next year, like physically coming. We had Netflix animation come and come to campus during COVID, and also Disney television animation and even you mentioned Afro animation. I reached out to them as well. So I think the key thing for us has been partnerships, and as far as careers, I mean, it runs a gamut. Everything from, again, like you mentioned, concept artists to writing for animation to character design. There are people just design, props, props for animation, or just background designers. I mean, and that's what I'm trying to get our students to understand is like everyone may not be an animator. Maybe you're an inker, or maybe you're a rigger. You know what I mean? Or maybe you're a texture. You do textures or something like that.
We don't
So
know what these things are, but okay.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, well, and they're just a wide variety of avenues. And again, there's the Hollywood route and there's the independent route. And sometimes sometimes you just have to do you and tell your stories and open up your own studio. And sometimes, Hollywood will come knocking on the independence door. And so and entrepreneurship is kind of another thing we're pushing. As we mentioned, there are a lot of, more, I'm connecting with more Black and African-owned animation studios across the world, and that's just exciting to really think about. How do we think about not only just going to go work for somebody after you get your degree? Maybe, hey, open up your own, like Theodore Collins, or some of the other Leo Sullivan and Ayoka Chizira, some of the other African American animators that I've come across.
And then another good ploy is to just, if you're gonna go the Hollywood route, having your brain. I mean, everybody is not an entrepreneur.
Right.
But if you have in your brain when there's a certain cutoff point, then I'm gonna go for my own, or you gain your skills. You gain your skills beyond school, and you use those to do your own thing, tell your own stories.
Exactly.
You're very limited a lot of times when you're in a studio setting. They pigeonhole you oftentimes to do one thing. So if you're gonna do that, get those skills and come back out.
Yeah, and a lot of us, listen, we're freelancing. I do motion graphics and animation for different filmmakers and TV shows, and so we're hustling. And so what our president, President Bro, the first woman president at Bowie State, she's created this initiative to push entrepreneurship across the entire academy, across all of the departments, not just in the School of Business or the School of Marketing. So she wants arts and as a matter of fact, the Entrepreneurship Innovation Center, it actually sits in the science department. So going back to my brother talking about science, and getting again all of our students to think like, yes, I can have my degree, but yeah, you might be out here hustling like all of us. So maybe that's a product, maybe that's a business, maybe that's an app, maybe that's a game, maybe that's a new product or service that you can create. And so that's what we're trying to infuse is like, get that degree, but listen, hey, maybe this might be an entrepreneurial venue for you, and that's something we're pushing in VCDMA. We connect the business of marketing and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, and I kind of understand that. Having taught in Savannah in SCAD, where we always had Disney and Pixar and all those coming, and Blue Sky, and I used to be like Rhythm and Hues, and all those would come in regularly and stuff like that. Yeah, so I understood that. I understand that, and the entrepreneurship thing. And that's very much an American thing. Now, coming to Australia, what is interesting is the animation industry isn't that big here. So it isn't that big here. So one of the things we try to encourage the students to do is to develop to be an all-rounder as much as possible. Yeah, you get to specialize if you want to specialize, but essentially they're encouraged to be all-rounders as much as possible. That's quite useful. I find I'm actually, one of the things that I try to do, or I'm actually teaching a lot of storyboarding classes. So I'm teaching those kind of storyboarding classes, visualization classes, storytelling classes, character design classes. And one of the things that I try to get people to do is stop, ask yourself, you say this is character animation, but what is it? And I say, oh, I'm just designing some characters. And I often tell them, no, that's just an illustration. It is not a character. And then they're surprised. So I then take them back and I say, look, to have a character, first of all, you need a narrative or a story. so that you can have a character in it that drives the narrative from its beginning through whatever trajectories to the end. So that's how you have a character. But in order to have a character, you need to have personalities. That character must have some personalities. So when I say personalities, I'm saying even if it's a bottle that's personified, it has to have a soul first. It has to have the anima. But the anima, it's not just about moving it, it's about the behaviors. To have a personality, you need to have a set of behaviors. So if this guy is a crazy guy, he must behave in a certain way, or he must emulate the behavior of somebody who's insane. Now, how do you manage to capture that? You capture that through observation. And how do you manage to capture your observations? Is when you start to do things like gesture drawings and stuff like that. This is when you're starting to understand how characters will behave. So all that is necessary before you construct a character. So in a sense, what happens is that a character must be auditioned through the creative process before it enters your production. Otherwise, it's just an illustration. You can do all the turnarounds you like, but it's just an illustration. So I try to teach them to work that way, to come to that way. I've heard you talk about stop motion, and I laugh because I did a master's in computer animation, and after doing a master's in computer animation, I went and did all my work in stop motion. So when I was doing my PhD, a lot of the practical work I did was stop motion. I did so much of it. I used to get my armatures made at the same company that made Adman's armatures. And it's one of those areas it's very much of interest to me because I actually taught my kids to do stop motion when they were little. Mm-hmm. And so for me, animation is about creating impossible worlds. And historically, you go back and you look at what Ray Harryhausen was doing. Ray Harryhausen was basically, he never called himself an animator. He called himself a filmmaker and a storyteller. But yet he did the most amazing stop motion. Jason and the Argonauts, Sinbad, he did all those kinds of films that he did. The Clash of the Titans, it's all stop motion. So he was using his puppets, his stop motion, puppets. He was using them and using stuff like force perspective and all these kinds of things to create the most amazing things. It just so happens, in fact, the Star Trek, all the early Star Treks, stop motion. Jurassic Park, stop motion animatronics. You see what I'm saying? So I always tell my students, and when I was in Savannah, I would always ask students to go take stop motion classes before they did 3D. Just so you understand space and materiality and textures and form and stuff like that before you do it. You see what I'm saying? So I remember again in Savannah, we had to do admissions and people had to bring portfolios. And I got loads of Indian students who came in who hadn't done any 3D. They were all sculptors. And they came in and they blew everybody away because they quickly learned the tools because they understood what they were doing. You understand? So it's a holistic, everything has been done holistically. And without that kind of understanding and that grounding is always going to be a problematic.
Yeah, one of the things I was talking to illustrators, Eric Battle, who does the comic books, and Jose Holder. And one of the things that they said as illustrators, which is like they really become directors on paper because they have to do the lighting, the scenery, the background, the crowd. I mean, they have to do that. So one of the things they were saying is that you have to be holistic. You have to learn everything. Yeah. Be just an illustrator instead of, it's not just sketching on a piece of paper.
And if
you're doing comic book because you're doing frames like a film.
Right.
So yeah, just being holistic, learning everything, knowing how
Yeah.
to do different styles, and you can go cross mediums, you can go into books, you can go into advertising, you can go, I mean, so there's many roads that you can travel
Yeah.
um,
And
with
and
that.
if I can add to that, no, just everything you all are saying is so true. We teach the foundation as you've got to have that foundation. You mentioned sculptors. I mean, I've had a chance to go out to Industrial Lights of Magic ILM, and I talked to them several times, and at one point they were like, we really want sculptors and art folks that can draw. Like, forget the computers, the digital, the software.
Hmm.
We'll teach you all of that stuff. Can you draw? Do you know the human anatomy? Do you understand,
Yes.
like my brother mentioned, acting, the soul of a character, storytelling? And that's something we try to do in VCDMA is because my students are like, well, why do I need to take sculpture, writing and drawing and life drawing? I'm like, listen, you got to have those fundamentals. I'm so happy my brother said stop motion before 3D. We're kind of doing it backwards because we didn't have stop motion at first, but again, yes, just looking at some, you mentioned Ray Harryhausen and some of the amazing films that were done without anything digital, just pure cinematic, right?
Yeah.
The import photography, you know what I mean? I would sit in film classes and I would say the best films were like the best photographers. I'm like, so pick up that camera and learn, how to shoot just an image, right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes we lose some of the basics, right? And that's something that we try to do, at Bowie State, is really make sure they have a strong foundation in writing, drawing, sculpting. I
Yeah.
said, turn the computer off. Here's a pencil. Here's a sheet of paper,
Yeah.
right? Or take your phone. Here's a camera. How do you compose that image? And then you mentioned earlier history, Charles. And so, we actually implemented our first history of animation course, and it's a history of animation, but it's also, we incorporate the history of us, like who are some of the African and African American women animators, LGBTQ and Native American animators that we never read about or hear about. And I think that's really, really important for them to have that. In addition to, we have a new African American cinema class as well, history class. So making sure they have that foundation of what came before. You have this foundation, and so you can move forward.
So what I mean,
Yeah.
for we have to we're winding down, but for uh junior high, maybe elementary, I don't know, 'cause you all start at 5. For elementary, junior high, high school students, what should they be thinking of now at this early age, if they recognize, or even if their parents recognize, because parents need to be encouraging, they recognize that they have a skill set like drawing or writing, or I mean, what should they be thinking in terms of maturing or developing into what, trying to get in academia, or I mean, what should they be thinking now? Get any advice, and we can wind down with that.
I would, I would, I would always say it's a bit like, the night in the United States, you've got like wild horses, and they're called Mustangs. All right. In Australia, they also call wild horses. You just call them Brumbies. Now, the thing about these animals is they are absolutely amazing. And as we know from the stories of Native Americans, they'll capture them, then they'll capture them, or let's not use the word capture, they will harness them, then they would learn to walk with them and develop trust in them. And then those
Domesticate.
horses will become amazing war machines, amazing machines, because they understand how to work with the natives. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In a sense, the high school children coming up, they're the Mustangs, they're the Brumbies.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is bring them in and then show them how to help train them, their eyes, so that they can see beyond the illustration, so they can realize that illustration is really good. However, it forms the foundation for drawing, for animation.
Right.
Because in animation, you have to learn how to undraw to draw. You
Hmm.
have to draw the essence of your work, not everything. Because in animation, nothing comes for free. So if you're going to draw a character with so many fine hairs and you're really good at spending hours doing that, it will not work for animation. And I'll tell you what, you see, illustration is meant to be still so you can soak it in. Animation is meant to move so you can tell a story.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
So that's how they work. And so the thing to do is to teach those kids how to illustrate when they're creating their concept art, but learn to draw the essence of it for their work. So we have to start encouraging them to realize that there are different applications of drawing and
Right.
there are different ways of seeing. That when you're trying to capture an image, you don't just start making as many lines as possible, but you first spend time looking at it and understanding that, okay, these bits are black, all these bits are white. That if you put gray in here and you put gray in there and little shades, you start playing with those kinds of, pieces of the jigsaw, you'd get an image. So one of the things I'm training students to do, because ironically, we have no drawing classes, nothing like that whatsoever. I've seen them cut off the curriculum, cut out, period. They're not there.
Mm.
So I get all these people coming in who can draw, and then I have to teach them something that the Japanese do, Noten theory and Gestalt theory.
Mm.
And that's how to look at black and white in an image and pick them out and put them together. And the sooner you do that, the more you get students really
Hmm.
get. So we need to teach them those kind of things that they can do very quickly. So it will build their intellectual creative muscle.
Mm.
Right. Right.
So they should draw. We should encourage them to draw, but train their eyes so that they walk with us. So, they go from being Brumbies or Mustangs into becoming race horses.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So sorry for
Yeah.
the philosophy
Oh
of it
no, my
all.
brother, I'm agreeing with the philosophy. So, I used to be a high school teacher. Actually, I've taught high school, middle school, elementary. I've taught different levels, and so, one thing I would encourage parents to do, or is to you mentioned drawing. I definitely can't stress how important that is as a skill. Again, even with my students who may be, excellent in Maya or Cinema 4D or whatever software that is, I'm like, yeah, okay, let's turn that computer off. Just the pen and the paper, okay? Can you do that? Or a piece of clay, I put it in front of you. What happens? I believe that all of our young people are innate storytellers, and I think that's something that's really important. Is I would tell my students, you have the greatest story that's yet to be told. You are a storyteller, right? Now, how we express that, if it's 2D, if it's stop motion, if it's 3D, etc. But I would say, definitely taking art classes, theater. Theater was a huge impact in my life at Morgan State. Okay, I would do makeup and special effects and things for the theater department, and so I learned a lot from theater, watching live theater, how the audience responds to these characters live, right? So I think that's really, really important. And of course, writing. I think a lot of times maybe some of my students may not be an animator, maybe you're a writer. Maybe you could come up with a story, or maybe, as my brother mentioned earlier, you're a storyboard artist, you're an doing animatics. But certainly art classes, sculpture, think of theater, drama courses at high schools, middle schools, I think are going to be excellent. And I will mention, shameless plug, we're hosting something called Soul in Motion. We're doing what's called the Prince George's Film Festival, and we're going to have one day on September 24th where I'm inviting different animators from all over to come in and share these tips with students and
Oh,
schools
that'll be
themselves.
pre our
Yeah,
festival.
yeah, I know exactly. But my point being is, but we want to, but that's something we want to continue with Bowie State. Is I want to bring in, definitely going to bring my brother on campus at some point, but bring in all these animators to share their successes, and not just with Bowie students. I mean, we want to reach back to the high schools, to the middle school students, and to the elementary school students, so we can have this. I see this pipeline. We're reaching out to even some schools in the Caribbean now to see how we can make these partnerships, with Bowie State and HBCUs in the Caribbean, of course, Africa. No doubt, we want to make that connection, and we're trying to make those connections too. But yeah, drawing, writing, photography. You don't have to have the most fanciest software, the most fastest computer. You got a cell phone. You can. I said, here's your camera. You can't see it, but anyway, there's your camera. I mean, kids, these young folks they're doing amazing animation right now on their
Mm-hmm.
Procreate and through their
Mm-hmm.
phone. And so use whatever you have, and that's how we are as African people. We
Yep.
innovate, we create, you know what I mean? We don't let things hold us back. And so we improvise with what we have.
Yeah.
But definitely I say drawing, sculpture, writing, photography, whatever you can do to just demonstrate and just again be a storyteller. That's it.
And yeah, I
Yes.
forgot to add one thing. Read stories.
Yes.
Just read stories. Just read, 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 read. It's so important because stories are the lifeblood of animation. Animation is the soul of the craft because we breathe life into. But once life is breathed into something, if it doesn't have blood, it becomes a zombie, right?
Mhm.
That's why we got so many animation projects that are 3D animation, whatever, and they're just so soulless. You'd see
Right.
so many of them because they don't have the lifeblood. There's a story in it.
Right.
And yet you can see some really squiggly lines and stuff like that on the screen, and they just exude life. You want to hug them.
Right.
You feel like you want to. So storytelling is really important, and you've got to
Absolutely.
read to tell a story. You've got to read a story. To play an instrument, you've got to listen to other musicians as well.
That's right.
So that is really important. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, y'all have been wonderful. I could sit here and talk forever, but we have gone over already. Believe me, an hour goes fast. But
Absolutely.
this has been
yeah.
a true pleasure. We have the distinct pleasure of actually Dr. daCosta will be coming to San Antonio teaching framing invisibility in animation.
Oh, amazing.
So
That's based
that,
on a book I wrote a
which is
couple of
also
years
a book
ago.
that
Oh, I'm
he's
gonna have to,
done. So
we
this
gotta
makes
we're
me
gonna have
feel
to
like
get
he's
that. We're gonna have to get that.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so just dealing with stereotypes and how to see and recognize
Yeah.
and beyond. So
Absolutely.
stick around for that live panel in San Antonio.
Excellent.
Yeah,
So I
and
thank
that
you
book.
guys.
I was just going to say the book looks at. I use case studies from of black representation in the UK.
Wow.
So you'd be interested in it.
Oh,
And my case
yes.
studies, in fact, I home in on Adman Animation's work. So it's all
Wow.
stop motion
Stop
mostly.
motion. I can't wait to get that, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
We'll
yeah, well,
talk.
we'll exchange emails.
Absolutely.
I'll get your
We'll be
email and.
talking. You'll be talking.
Anytime. It'd be an honor. It'd be an honor.
But
Nice to connect.
thank you guys both. This has been great. There's so much more questions to ask. I wish we could even have done this live, but we do a lot of our pre-records for the festival because we're doing hybrid and it's like a lot to run. So we're doing the
Understood.
pre-records, but I'm sure there are a lot of questions that we'll get after. Just in terms of being able to reach
Hmm.
both of you, I know Tewodross, you can go to Instagram
Yes.
at
Yes.
DFAPA.
Yeah. And I would. Yeah. DFPA. That's the department. At VCDMA is our the program as well. VCDMA,
Mhm.
Visual Communication, Digital Media Arts, and then me personally, I'm at Soul Cinematic. At Soul Cinematic, and
I thought I
learn more
had
about
that.
my. Yep.
Okay. I had actually
Oh, yes.
visualjazzmedia.net.
Yes, yes, that's I know. I couldn't. The long story short, that is the name of my studio. Visual Jazz Media is my studio here in Mount Rainier,
Mhm.
named after Romare Bearden, by the way, one of my favorite
Oh,
artists.
cool.
But yeah, Visual Jazz Media, and yeah, and of course, BowieState.edu to learn more about Bowie State.
And Charles, how can wait a minute, let me take this
So
down.
I tend, I tend to have gone into hibernation for a bit.
Why? Why are you in
I took a-
hibernation?
um, yeah, but I've just completed a project, and what I would do is I'm hoping to show it at the festival. It's just 4 minutes long, and but what I'll do is I'll send the trailer to all of you, 30 seconds
Mhm.
Excellent.
to have a yeah.
Is that
Um,
at one Coco? At
Yeah,
or
yeah,
hashtag?
at one Coco. Yes, that's right. For Instagram, yeah. So that's where I am. Yeah, at one Coco. Yeah. Let me just
And I'm sure there's a story behind that, but we are running out of time.
it's
One
one
Coco.
Coco literally means cocoa is cocoyam.
Mm,
And there's a saying that one cocoa full of basket. So it takes, every little bit helps. That's what it literally
Oh,
means.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. One Coco. It sounds cooler.
Yeah.
Then every little bit helps.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
thank you, gentlemen. Have a wonderful rest of
thank
the
you.
day. We appreciate you joining us and giving us the spill on what's going on in academics and beyond.
All right. Thank
And
you.
for youth out there, these are two places to consider. One needs some color and blood.
Yep.
And the other one is training and getting color and blood out there, either independently or in the industry work. So
Appreciate it.
many ways to enter, and you got to be passionate, and like I said, just do it. Just do it. There's a way to make things happen. All right, gentlemen, you have a wonderful rest.
All right,
of
thank you.
month. We thank you.
Appreciate you. Peace, my brother. Be blessed, man.
Well,
Thank you, Ada.
Bye bye.
We'll
Peace and love to you.
Bye.
One love.